Hello again. Hello, friends. Oh, I'm so glad you came back to join me. It's me, Patty Lynn. Oh, I look different? Something is different about me, eh? What do you suppose that could be? Yes, today I'm wearing my fairy wings. And you might know why. Would it have to do with the story, perhaps, that I'm going to tell you today? Absolutely. Oh, I love fairies. I hope you do too. And I found a wonderful book written by Tanya Robyn Batt and illustrated by Gail Newey. And it's called The BAREFOOT Book of Fairies. And inside this book, there's a collection of all different kinds of stories around fairies. And the one that I like the most is about a cake baker. And that's the one I'm going to share with you today. Now, if you want to join me as a fairy today, maybe you want to go find your wings and we can fly together. I like to fly like this because the fairies are going to be flying in and out throughout the story. And also at the end of this story today, I'm going to share with you some ideas of ways you can story act this particular one at home with your family and your friends. So, shall we get started? Here we go. The story is called The Fairies and the Cake Baker. Once there was a cake baker. Her name was Margaret, and she made the most delicious cakes that anyone ever tasted. In fact, she was very well known for being the best baker around. And people from far and wide would come to her house just to sample these wonderful, delicious, yummy, yummy cakes. But you know, people weren't the only ones that enjoyed Margaret's cakes. The fairies loved her cakes as well. And a lot of times the fairies would fly into Margaret's house and they would eat up all the crumbs that were left over from the people who ate her cakes. But then suddenly the crumbs weren't there anymore. People weren't even leaving a crumb. The cake was that good. And the fairies had nothing, no cake whatsoever. And they were angry, as you can imagine. They got together one day and one of them said, "It isn't fair. There's no more crumbs for us to eat. It's just not fair. We need our cake too." And then one fairy got an idea. She said, "You're right. There isn't a crumb left for us fairies. But what if we kidnapped Margaret and brought her to Fairyland, and then she would make all the delicious cakes just for us fairies?" "Oh, good idea," they all said. And so they planned that the next day they were going to kidnap Margaret. Now, when Margaret woke up the next day, she made her way, as she always does, to the market to buy all the supplies that she needs for her cakes. And when she got about halfway there, the fairies somewhat gathered around her. Margaret never saw them because, well, they're so teeny tiny, practically invisible. But what the fairies did was they sprinkled something called fern root in Margaret's eyes. Fern root is very magical in Fairyland. You see, if you sprinkle fern root in a person's eyes, they immediately fall asleep. And that's what they did. When Margaret was asleep, they picked her up and they flew her over to Fairyland. And then they all stood around her, waiting for her to wake up. No! Hello? Hello? Who are you? "We are the fairies, Margaret. We flew you to Fairyland because we want you to bake us a cake." Oh, indeed. You mean that you don't get any cake here in Fairyland? No, we do not get any cake. We used to get the crumbs from your cakes, but now we don't even get the crumbs. So we want you to make us an ooey, gooey, delicious chocolate cake, okay? Well, as you can imagine, Margaret was a little bit afraid. I mean, it was kind of strange being in Fairyland, but she didn't want the fairies to detect that she was scared. So Margaret simply said, "Yes, of course, yes, indeed, I will make you a cake." "Oh, all right. Well, to make a ooey gooey chocolate cake, I'm going to need some sugar and butter and flour and eggs and a little bit of milk and salt and a little bit of cocoa. Can you supply those things for me?" And the fairies looked at each other. No, not exactly. We don't have those things. But what we do have is we have the dewdrop from the leaves first thing in the morning. It's pretty yummy. And some really scrumptious flower petals. They're actually quite delicious. Will those do? "Oh, that does sound delicious," said Margaret, "but no, I'm afraid I'm going to need all the things I asked for, the ingredients. But I have an idea. Why don't you just fly back to my house and gather up all those things from my kitchen? Okay?" Well, the fairies indeed wanted that chocolate cake. So the fairies began flapping their wings and flying over to Margaret's house. They gathered up all the ingredients and flew back to Fairyland and placed them in front of Margaret. "Oh, wonderful," said Margaret. "Oh, now all I'll need is a great big mixing bowl and a wooden spoon. Can you supply me with those, please?" And the fairies, they looked at one another and they said, "Not exactly. No, we don't have that. We can give you the bottom of a little acorn and a stick. Would that work?" No, said Margaret, "not exactly. However, if you fly back to my house, you will find the bowl and the spoon on my kitchen counter." And so once again, the fairies, they flew over to Margaret's house and came back with the spoon and the mixing bowl. And they placed it in front of Margaret. Well, now Margaret was all ready to mix. She poured in the butter and the sugar, and she began to mix with the spoon. Oh dear," said Margaret. You know what? Well, you see, I never make an ooey gooey chocolate cake without my kitty cat. Cuddles is her name. And she is just so sweet. She purrs so gently while I mix the batter. I don't suppose that you would fly over to my house and bring Cuddles back for me, would you? And so the fairies, once again, they flew back over to Margaret's house. They found Cuddles asleep on Margaret's bed. They grabbed a hold of her by the scruff of her neck and her tail and flew her over to Fairyland. Cuddles was a bit confused, but when she saw Margaret, she felt much better. And she just purred gently as she weaved in and out of Margaret's legs. And Margaret once again began to stir the batter. Oh dear. You know, I'm just about to put the flour into the cake mix here, and, I miss my dog, Peanut. Peanut, he taps his little tail gently against my leg, and I know exactly how many stirs I need to make in that cake. I don't suppose that you could possibly fly back over to my house and bring me my dog, Peanut. So once again the fairies flew over to Margaret's house. They found Peanut laying by the fireplace. Gently they grabbed hold of his back end and his collar and whisked him off to fairyland. Oh, now, as you can imagine, Peanut was a bit confused as well. But again, when he saw Margaret and the kitty cat Cuddles, he felt much better. And so Peanut began to tap his tail against Margaret's leg while Cuddles purred and Margaret stirred the batter. "Oh my," said Margaret. "Oh no. I fear that my baby Emma is about to wake up from her morning nap. Oh, she's going to be so upset when she doesn't find me at home to give her her bottle. She likes when I give her her bottle, even though my husband, John, is home. I don't suppose that you would mind flying back over to my house and bringing me my baby Emma? Would you?" "Oh, okay," said the fairies, and once again they flew back over to Margaret's house. They found baby Emma sleeping in her crib. Without waking her, they gently lifted the baby up and flew her back to fairyland. Oh, Margaret was so happy when she saw her baby, and she held her close to her chest. Oh, Emma, Emma. But when baby Emma woke up and she saw all of the hundreds of eyes of fairy eyes looking at her, well, you can imagine she was a little scared. And being scared, she began to cry. Well, you see, fairies do not like noise. And when the fairies heard the baby crying, they all put their hands over their ears and said, "No noise, no more noise. Stop that baby from crying, Margaret. Stop her now." And Margaret said, "Well, I would like to stop my baby from crying and console her, but you see, I'm right in the middle of mixing this batter, and we don't want the cake to be ruined. I have an idea. Why don't you fly back to my house, where you'll find my husband, John? Oh, John is very good at consoling baby Emma. Would you mind?" No, we'll go. Let's go now. Hurry up." And so they flew back over to Margaret's house, and they found John. He was rocking on a rocking chair with a newspaper in his lap, but he was sound asleep. They picked him up by his collar and the seat of his pants and whisked him over to fairyland. Oh my goodness, you can imagine what John looked like when he got to fairyland. But he was more concerned about the baby crying and his wife, Margaret, mixing the batter for a cake. So he reached over to grab baby Emma from Margaret's arms, and he accidentally stepped on Cuddles' tail. "Meow!" screamed Cuddles, and she jumped upon Peanut's back. And this made baby Emma The cat was yelping, the dog was barking, the baby was crying, and the fairy said, "Too much noise, too much noise." And they picked up Margaret, John, baby Emma, Cuddles the cat, Peanuts the dog, and they whisked them out the door of fairyland. Well, Margaret and her family, they went home, and they had a nice dinner together, and then they went to sleep. But when everyone else was sleeping, Margaret woke up. You see, she couldn't sleep she was worried about the fairies. I mean, after all, they never got their ooey gooey chocolate cake. And so Margaret decided to go into her kitchen, put on her apron, and she baked them the most delicious, ooey gooey, delectable, nummy yummy chocolate cake. And she took it over to the door of Fairyland and gently placed it on the ground. And then she went home and she went to sleep. Later that night, when the fairies came out of the door of Fairyland, they saw the chocolate cake. They sat down and all of them ate every single morsel, even every single crumb. Oh, it was delicious. And then they got a little pouch and filled it with some gold and flew it over to Margaret's house. They flew into Margaret's bedroom and gently placed that little bag of gold under Margaret's pillow with a note that said, "Thank you, Margaret, for the delicious chocolate cake. Love, your friends, the fairies." Oh, I hope you liked that story, boys and girls. And I hope you liked the book that I got it from. And maybe you will find this book sometime. The Barefoot Book of Fairies by Tanya Robyn Batt and illustrated by Gail Newey. Aren't books wonderful? They take us on so many adventures, and they give us so many wonderful ideas. Speaking of ideas, if you like to story act the story of Margaret and the fairies, you could do this at home with your family and your friends. You know, when I go out and I teach classes, or when I go to libraries to perform, I love to share the story, and I usually have my friends become all of the people in the story, as well as all of the fairies in the story while I narrate. And you could do this too, if you want to. You could play this video again and have me narrate, or have somebody else in your family narrate. But what I really love is when everybody tries on all of the characters. So if you were a person the first time you listened or you did the story, you acted it out, next time, why don't you try on being a fairy and create your own wonderful, wonderful version of this story of Margaret and the fairies. Thanks again, boys and girls, for coming out and watching the video today. Make sure you like it, subscribe, hit the notifications, and I look forward to seeing you next time for a wonderful story. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.